Have you ever wondered why some men seem to walk away from profound connections, not with a roar of defiance, but with a whisper of retreat? It's a paradox that has haunted countless hearts. The man who appears fearless in the face of losing you, yet crumbles when truly seen. This isn't about the bravado of the uncommitted, nor the superficial dance of fleeting affections. This delves into a deeper, more insidious fear, the terror of unveiling one's authentic self, a fear so profound it often masquerades as indifference. We've all witnessed it, or perhaps even lived it. The sudden chill in a once ardent gaze, the subtle withdrawal of affection, the slow fade of intimacy, not because love has died, but because something within has been triggered, something ancient and primal that recoils from the light. It is the fear of vulnerability, not just in its raw emotional sense, but in the profound exposure of one's deepest insecurities, their unhealed wounds, their very shadow. This isn't about losing you. It's about losing the carefully constructed facade that protects them from the gaze of their own buried self. Consider the intricate tapestry of Elias's life, a man whose charisma was as undeniable as the morning sun. He was a force, a sculptor of grand ambitions, his hands always moving, creating, shaping. Women gravitated towards him, drawn by his quiet strength, his air of subtle mystery. Among them was Clara, a woman of luminous empathy and keen observation. Their connection sparked like flint on steel, immediate and intense. Elias seemed to meet her with an equal fervor, his eyes alight with a recognition that transcended words. He spoke of shared futures, of dreams intertwined, and Clara, with her open heart, believed him. Their early days were a symphony of discovery, long nights lost in conversation, days filled with laughter and shared silences that spoke volumes. Elias was present, engaged, almost voracious in his desire to know her. He revealed glimpses of his past, fragments of childhood, and the triumphs and trials that had forged him. Yet, even in these intimate disclosures, Clara noticed a subtle guardedness, a fleeting shadow that would cross his eyes when she ventured too close to certain topics. It was as if a part of him remained perpetually in the wings, observing, always ready to recede. The first crack in their porcelain-perfect connection appeared subtly, a hairline fracture in the smooth surface. Clara, in a moment of tender vulnerability, shared a childhood memory, a deeply personal account of feeling overlooked and unseen by her own father. She spoke of the quiet ache that had lingered for years, and the profound longing for acceptance. Elias listened, his face a mask of attentiveness, yet something shifted. His customary warmth cooled, and a subtle tension entered the air. He offered perfunctory comfort, a hurried change of subject. Clara, perceptive as she was, felt the subtle recoil. It was a moment of profound recognition for her, a realization that her vulnerability, intended to foster deeper connection, had instead created a chasm. The next few days were marked by Elias's increasing unavailability. His phone calls grew shorter, his texts less frequent. He began to cite work commitments, sudden urgencies that kept him away. Clara, bewildered, tried to bridge the growing distance. She reached out, offered understanding, and even in her desperation, apologized, though she knew not for what. Each attempt was met with a polite, almost glacial detachment. The man who had once been so eager to see her now seemed almost allergic to her presence. The emotional atmosphere shifted from vibrant intimacy to a desolate silence, a vacuum where laughter and shared dreams once resided. The loneliness began to seep in, a cold, insidious dread. One evening, after several days of strained communication, Clara suggested they truly talk, about what was happening. Elias agreed, but his agreement felt heavy, burdened. They met at their usual cafe, a place that once resonated with the hum of their affection. Now it felt like a silent tomb. Clara, her heart aching with confusion, gently pressed him. "Elias," she began, her voice soft but firm. "What's happening between us? It feels like you're pulling away." He looked at her, his eyes unreadable, a wall of guardedness rising between them. "Nothing's happening, Clara," he said, his voice devoid of its usual warmth. "I'm just busy. Work is demanding." But Clara saw the subtle tremor in his hand, the way his gaze flickered away when she held it. It wasn't about work. It was something else, something deeper. She spoke of their connection, the intimacy they had shared, the future he had so readily envisioned. She laid bare her own fear of losing him, her confusion at his sudden withdrawal. As she spoke, his discomfort visibly mounted. He fidgeted, his jaw clenched, and a palpable tension radiated from him. Finally, when she paused, he spoke, his voice clipped and distant. "Look, Clara, I don't know what you want me to say. I need space." And with that, he stood, abruptly, leaving her sitting there, amidst the clatter of coffee cups and the murmur of other conversations, utterly alone. The pain was sharp, an unexpected blow to the gut. The confusion, however, was worse. It wasn't the fear of losing her that drove Elias, but the burgeoning terror of being truly seen, of his carefully constructed inner world being exposed to the light of her genuine empathy. His sudden detachment wasn't an act of indifference, but a desperate flight from the vulnerability he unconsciously perceived as a threat. The emotional climax for Clara was not the break itself, but the dawning realization that his fear was not of her, but of himself. Elias, the archetypal Puer Aeternus, or eternal youth in a Jungian sense, struggled deeply with the integration of his shadow. His charm, his ambition, and his outward success were all part of a carefully curated persona designed to protect a fragile, unintegrated self. His flight from Clara's emotional intimacy was a classic case of ego projection, where his own internal anxieties about being seen as imperfect or flawed were projected onto her as a threat. He wasn't afraid of losing her love. He was terrified of the self he might discover when truly reflected in her accepting gaze. This avoidance stemmed from an unhealed wound, perhaps a childhood experience where vulnerability was met with rejection or ridicule, leading to a profound fear of exposure. For you, when faced with such a dynamic, understand that his withdrawal isn't a reflection of your worth, but a manifestation of his internal battle. The solution lies not in pursuing him, for that only feeds his need for flight, but in turning inward. Engage in your own shadow work, exploring what parts of yourself might be drawn to such a dynamic, what unconscious patterns are being played out. Embrace stoicism in the face of his emotional distance, recognizing that you cannot control another's internal landscape. Focus on your own self-worth, detaching from the need for his validation. When someone fears being seen, the most empowering action you can take is to fully and authentically see yourself, without their mirror. This journey of individuation is your path, not his. The echoes of Elias's sudden retreat lingered, but Clara, with her innate capacity for introspection, began to see beyond the immediate sting of rejection. She started to understand that his fear of being truly seen was intrinsically linked to a deeper psychological truth. The internal landscape of a man who perceives genuine intimacy not as a sanctuary, but as a crucible where his hidden flaws will be exposed and his carefully constructed identity shattered. This isn't merely about superficial insecurities. It delves into the very core of one's psychic structure, touching upon the unacknowledged aspects of self that Carl Jung termed the shadow. Consider the profound wisdom embedded in Carl Jung's assertion: one does not become enlightened by imagining figures of light, but by making the darkness conscious. This profound statement serves as a potent lens through which to examine Elias's behavior and the broader human tendency to recoil from genuine connection. The darkness Jung speaks of is not inherently evil. It encompasses all those aspects of ourselves that we deem unacceptable, unlovable, or simply inconvenient, and thus relegate to the unconscious. For Elias, this darkness likely included feelings of inadequacy, a fear of failure, or perhaps a deep-seated belief that he was fundamentally unworthy of unconditional love. When Clara, with her insightful gaze and empathetic nature, began to penetrate his superficial charm and touch upon these deeper layers, she inadvertently illuminated his shadow. This wasn't a malicious act on her part. It was simply the natural progression of genuine intimacy. However, for Elias, who had not yet dared to make his own darkness conscious, her light felt like an unbearable glare. He wasn't afraid of losing Clara. He was terrified of losing the carefully constructed illusion of himself that he presented to the world, an illusion he had convinced himself was reality. The mind, in its intricate dance between the conscious and unconscious, often develops sophisticated defense mechanisms to protect itself from uncomfortable truths. Sigmund Freud's concept of repression comes to mind, where threatening thoughts, memories, or impulses are unconsciously pushed out of awareness. For Elias, it wasn't simply a conscious decision to avoid vulnerability. It was a deeply ingrained pattern, likely established in his formative years. Perhaps he had learned, through conditional love or criticism, that revealing his true self led to pain or abandonment. This early conditioning, as B.F. Skinner might suggest through his work on operant conditioning, reinforced the behavior of emotional withdrawal as a means of escaping perceived punishment, rejection, and gaining reinforcement, a sense of safety and control. The deeper Clara delved, the more intensely Elias's unconscious mind signaled danger, triggering a flight response. Albert Bandura's theory of social learning further illuminates this dynamic. Individuals learn behaviors not only through direct experience but also by observing others. If Elias grew up in an environment where emotional vulnerability was met with disdain, mockery, or even a subtle shift in affection, he would have learned to suppress these aspects of himself. He might have observed male figures in his life who equated stoicism with strength, leading him to believe that emotional expression was a weakness. This learned behavior, reinforced over years, created a deeply entrenched schema. If I am seen, I will be hurt. His reaction to Clara wasn't a personal slight against her. It was an unconscious reenactment of old scripts, a desperate attempt to maintain a sense of psychological safety, however illusory. The internal debate raging within him was not about Clara's worth, but about his own capacity to withstand the perceived threat of genuine emotional transparency. He was debating with his own fear, his own unintegrated shadow, and in that moment the fear won. Moreover, William James, in his exploration of the self, understood that our identity is a complex interplay of our material, social, and spiritual selves. For Elias, his social self, the persona he presented to the world, was paramount. The idea of Clara seeing beyond this curated image into the messiness of his authentic self was an affront to this deeply held identity. It challenged his sense of competence and control. Carl Rogers' emphasis on unconditional positive regard speaks to the profound human need to be accepted for who one truly is, without judgment. Elias, however, lacked the internal resources to offer this to himself, and therefore he struggled to receive it from Clara. Her unconditional acceptance, instead of feeling like a gift, felt like an interrogation, probing the very defenses he had meticulously built. He wasn't afraid of losing her. He was afraid of losing the illusion of his own perfection, of having his hidden imperfections revealed to the very person whose regard he simultaneously craved and feared. His withdrawal was a desperate attempt to maintain internal homeostasis, however dysfunctional, to keep the lid on the parts of himself he had deemed unacceptable. The individual, caught in the grip of such an internal struggle, often appears as a shadow archetype, specifically, the unintegrated shadow, projecting their own insecurities onto others. Their behavior is not a reflection of a lack of feeling, but a deep-seated inability to process and express those feelings authentically. This creates a challenging dynamic as the individual, like Elias, perceives genuine connection as a threat to their carefully constructed self. To navigate such a relationship, if one chooses to, requires an acute understanding of these underlying psychological mechanisms. For you, the observer or the one experiencing this withdrawal, it is crucial to recognize that the other person's fear of being seen is a journey they must undertake themselves. Your role is not to force their hand, but to hold firm to your own truth and self-worth. Embrace the wisdom of Erik Erikson's stages of psychosocial development, particularly the stage of intimacy versus isolation. A person who fears being seen is often stuck in a pattern of isolation, unable to achieve true intimacy because they cannot fully integrate their own identity. Your empowerment comes from understanding that their fear is their battle, not yours to fight or fix. Focus on cultivating your own inner resilience and self-acceptance, recognizing that true connection flourishes in the space of authentic vulnerability, a space they are not yet ready to inhabit. Your worth is not diminished by their inability to see you fully. It is, in fact, highlighted by your courage to be seen. The retreat of Elias, driven by a deep-seated fear of exposure, unveiled a profound truth for Clara: that true intimacy demands an audacious act of self-revelation from both parties. His inability to meet her in that vulnerable space, fueled by an internal conflict he couldn't articulate, highlighted the critical juncture where fear of being seen morphs into a barrier to genuine connection. This isn't merely about personal preference. It delves into the fundamental human need for psychological safety and the complex journey of individuation, a path few dare to walk fully. The ultimate liberation for both individuals, the one who fears being seen and the one who seeks to truly see, lies in confronting this primal dread and understanding that the greatest power resides not in external validation, but in the radical acceptance of one's whole self. Consider the timeless words of the Roman Stoic philosopher Seneca: "As is a tale, so is life. Not how long it is, but how good it is what matters." This profound sentiment, while seemingly simple, carries immense weight when applied to the realm of relationships and the fear of being seen. Elias's story, a tale marked by his retreat, wasn't about the duration of his connection with Clara, but its quality, which was ultimately diminished by his inability to embrace vulnerability. His fear of being seen, of revealing his shadow self, prevented him from truly living a good relationship, one characterized by authenticity and mutual exposure. For many, like Elias, the fear of losing face, of being judged or found wanting, becomes the silent dictator of their emotional lives. They construct elaborate psychological fortresses, believing these walls protect them, when in reality, they trap them in a solitary confinement of their own making. This self-imposed isolation, driven by a lack of self-worth and unaddressed trauma, prevents the profound emotional release that comes with being truly seen and accepted. It's a tragic irony that the very thing they crave, connection, is precisely what they push away due to their unexamined fears. Imagine the ancient myth of Narcissus, often misunderstood as mere vanity. At its core, it speaks to a profound inability to see beyond one's own reflection, a self-absorption that precludes genuine engagement with another. While Elias was not necessarily vain in the classical sense, his actions mirrored Narcissus's core dilemma: a fundamental incapacity to perceive and integrate the parts of himself that did not align with his idealized self-image. When Clara offered him a mirror reflecting his true self, with all its beautiful complexities and potential vulnerabilities, he recoiled. This wasn't because her reflection was distorted, but because his internal landscape was unprepared to receive it. This fear, often rooted in early childhood experiences where genuine emotional expression might have been met with conditional love or disapproval, creates a pattern of avoidance. Jean Piaget's work on cognitive development reminds us how early schemas are formed, shaping our perceptions of the world and ourselves. If Elias, as a child, learned that his authentic self was somehow too much or not enough, he would have developed a cognitive framework that prioritized concealment over revelation. This learned behavior, ingrained through repetition and perceived negative reinforcement, became his default setting. The process of healing pain from such a dynamic requires a radical shift in perspective, not only for the person who fears being seen but also for the one who has experienced their withdrawal. For Clara, it meant recognizing that Elias's actions were not a judgment of her worth, but a manifestation of his internal landscape. This understanding, while painful, offered a pathway to liberation. She realized that she could not, and should not attempt to fix him. Her healing lay in recentering her own narrative, focusing on her intrinsic value. This aligns powerfully with the principles of empowering feminism, which asserts that a woman's worth is not contingent upon external validation, particularly from a man who cannot meet her emotional needs. It is about reclaiming agency, recognizing that true power comes from within, from a deeply rooted sense of self-acceptance and authenticity. For the individual who fears being seen, the journey towards wholeness, or individuation as Jung would describe it, begins with the arduous but ultimately liberating work of confronting their shadow. This involves acknowledging and integrating those disowned parts of themselves, the fears, the insecurities, the perceived flaws, rather than projecting them onto others or retreating from intimacy. It is a process of self-compassion and courage, allowing oneself to be vulnerable first to oneself, and then, perhaps, to a trusted other. The climax of this journey, for someone like Elias, would not be finding another relationship where he could maintain his guardedness, but rather a profound moment of internal reckoning. It would be the quiet, internal courage to sit with discomfort, to allow the vulnerability he so fiercely avoided to surface, and to realize that exposing one's authentic self is not an act of weakness but of immense strength. For Clara, her emotional release came not from Elias's change, but from her own internal liberation. She let go of the need for his validation, understanding that his fear was a reflection of his own unaddressed wounds, not a deficit in her. She began to invest in activities that nurtured her soul, embracing the solitude not as loneliness but as fertile ground for self-discovery. Walking in nature, practicing mindfulness, engaging in creative pursuits, these became her anchors, grounding her in her own sense of self. This inner work, this transformation of internal power, allowed her to cultivate positive thoughts, slowly but surely eliminating the negative thoughts that had once plagued her. The ending for her was a powerful rebirth, a quiet revolution of the self, where stillness became her sanctuary and self-acceptance her guiding star. What would you discover if you dared to truly see yourself and allow yourself to be seen, even by the quiet corners of your own heart? If you find this resonates, or see yourself in the story, please leave a comment to help our channel hear from you. And if you know someone who needs this video, please send them this video as a necessary share. Thanks for watching. The end.